So today we're going to try to really just finish up a few key points, and then start trying to reflect on our experience with passions. The point of this isn't, as I tried to explain last time, the point is not to, it's not like a list of doctrines that we have to accept. It's not like I adapt myself to a creed when it comes to philosophy. It's not some sort of creed or anything like that. It's just me trying to listen to reality as I come to this. They're not like principles, they're not like precepts to be accepted on faith, principles of philosophy. But I'm trying to discover the causes, as Brother Michael Paul talked briefly about the causes yesterday. That was very fortuitous. The causes and principles. A principle, let me throw that up there. The classic definition of a principle. He's not your pal, it's a principle.
No one can see the red marker.
Oh, I can't either. There you go. Why do we not have black markers? Okay. Is that better? There we go. Principle means in my philosophical search, starting from reality, trying to discover from reality the different causes. Eventually you get to a point where you can't go any further. Like a brief example of that would be like in the philosophy of art. You would say, like, you look at a work of art and say, what is the cause of this work of art? And when you would say, oh, well, like, for example, a car is a work of art. You look, all these pieces run together very smoothly and very joined together perfectly and stuff like that. Like if you were walking through the woods out here and you found a brand new late model Corvette sitting in the middle of the woods, what would you say? Would you say, wow, all these pieces came together by accident? Isn't this amazing? It's so awesome. You get in the driver's seat, you start the engine up, and you say, wow, isn't it just an amazing accident of evolution that all these things came together in that way so the car would actually start and be able to carry it around. No, you wouldn't say that. You would say, who put this car in here? So if you didn't know what a car was, you would look at the car, and you would realize that everything was very well put together for a certain purpose. And so when you saw the diversity of all the things that go on in the car, there's thousands of parts in the car, but they all seem to be put together for one purpose. You would say, well, what is the cause of this car? Like, what's the driving force that enabled this car to come together? You would say it's the idea of whoever had the idea of making the car. The idea behind the car. So that's an analogy from philosophy of art. And once you got that, you said the ideas that caused it, that's a principle. You would say that you can't go any further than that. We have arrived at the point where you can't say, well, artistically speaking, what caused the idea? No, the idea is what caused the car. And the unity in the car, the unity in diversity. And there's also something about, so whenever you come to you could say the same thing about the soul in the philosophy of the living being. That the soul, when I look at all the diversity of all the things that go on in the human body, my body, when I look at all the things I do, I eat, I walk, I love, many other things, I work, all those things. When you see all that diversity of things I do thousands of things every day. It's amazing the amount of things you do in a day. So when I come to discover that in that diversity of things, there's a unity behind it all. Just like you see the car in the woods, and you say, this car didn't get here by accident, there's something uniting all the pieces that make the car put together. So in the philosophy of the living being, you would say that the soul is the principle of what we call the vital operations of the soul. So I'll write that, vital operations. That's from philosophy of the living being. That's how you discover that in fact you do have a soul. It's not just a religious idea that you have to believe in or not believe in. The soul is something, just throwing that out there, the soul is something you can discover philosophically. Huh? Oh yeah. I haven't read it yet. Sorry. So principle is just when you're doing a philosophical search. It's you can't go. You would say that. It's kind of cumbersome, but it's more precise that way. That beyond which one cannot go in your philosophical search. So when it comes to philosophy of the living being, and you're trying to discover what is in the living being, what is the principle of the living being, that's what we're interested in. We're interested in discovering causes and proper principles, you would say. So in the living being, it would be, what is it, like the soul is not like it's not like an imaginary thing, it's not like a ghost inside of you. Not like a ghost. It's not like on the movie Ghost. If you've ever seen that movie, where you look pretty much like you used to. You don't have clothes and stuff. You just look a little blurred and fuzzy. Yeah, kind of transparent. That's not your soul. Your soul cannot be seen, cannot be touched, or anything like that. It can only be known. It's really an amazing thing that our intellect has the ability to know something without seeing it. It's kind of amazing. We know philosophically the soul exists by looking at all the operations, all the vital operations of life that go on in the human body. And from there we can say there must be some sort of invisible thing uniting us. That's just a little background on the philosophy of the living being. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to throw them out there. Okay, so with all these things, of course, as I mentioned, I'm not here to give you a list of doctrines or anything like that you have to believe on faith. That's for the Michael's department. So what I'm here to do is remind you that whenever you're thinking about something in a philosophical way, there's certain things we have to accept on faith. For example, I've never been to Seattle before. I had, but it was on the plane and never actually experienced Seattle. So I accepted on faith Seattle was a cool place. Now I know from my experience that Seattle is a cool place. So what happened there was that I went from opinion and I had a human faith. I believed the people who seemed to be reasonable people when they told me that Seattle was cool. So, they seem to be reasonable, yes. So when you say, but philosophically speaking, I would have to ask myself, when someone told me that Seattle existed, I would have to ask, does this correspond to my experience? So I didn't necessarily have an experience of Seattle, so I could take it as kind of an opinion that Seattle existed, that Seattle was an awesome place. But we always have to constantly ask ourselves, when I hear an opinion, does that correspond to my experience? Is it true? So that's with all the things I'm throwing out at you. It's an opinion until you actually think about it and ask yourself, does this correspond with my opinion, with my experience? Is it true? With my experience. So everything I'm telling you of reality. If we want to get out of the world of opinions and come back to a true contact with reality, we have to constantly come back to reality and ask ourselves, does this correspond with my experience? Experience understood in that very specific way that I mentioned yesterday. Not just like, oh, I had this awesome experience, but well, maybe I had an emotional experience. Like Brother Michael Paul was alluding to yesterday. People say, I had an experience of God. Like, well, not really. You had an experience of feelings that maybe came from God, maybe didn't. I have faith that God is there, but I have no experience in Him. So does this correspond to my experience? So, no one can make these philosophical discoveries for me. Like, that's what people say, oh, just give me the answer, brother. Like, that was always one of Brother Strauss's complaints with people. He's trying to get people to kind of figure out the answer to a question. They ask a question, and then they're just like, no, just give me the answer. Like, no, think about it. And just, I can't, just give me the answer. It's like we can't just, in philosophy, we can't do that. We can't just blindly say, no, I accept whatever you say on faith. No, we can't do that. We have to see if it matches with our experience of reality. Otherwise, I lose contact with reality. If you don't constantly ask yourself, do these opinions that I'm hearing correspond with my experience? Otherwise, you lose contact with reality because you'll believe in anything that comes along. It sounds nice. And because of a lack of philosophical training, I think that's how most people probably live their life like that. Ut in pluribus, ment in sensu. It's a fancy Latin phrase.
I think a lot of people believe the way they do is because of their experiences. So maybe they're not exactly experiencing that certain thing that they've heard of, but they're believing it anyway, but they're still believing it because of the certain experiences that they've had in life, and it seems to correspond with that and make sense. So they believe it.
So that, I understand where you're coming from. If I understand you, you're trying to say that because, like, let's say, because, for example, because I had a bad father, that because of that, I'll say, well, God the Father, God that doesn't exist, or something like that.
Yeah, sure.
That's just something I encounter a lot. Or I'll say something simpler, like, I don't like fish because I had a bad experience with fish when I was a kid, or something like that.
Sure, yeah.
Is that the sort of thing?
I think so, yeah.
My everyday way of thinking is conditioned, you could say. So it's affected and kind of formed by the affective experience. I think that's the difference perhaps between affective. That would be maybe what you call an affective experience. I'm just throwing that out there. I'm not sure exactly. But what am I still doing is I'm still going by what my feelings have told me, not by necessarily what my intelligence has told me. So when I'm saying that there's very few things that people do because they thought about it and chosen that, that is the best way to do things. Not a lot. Most people do most things that they do. I think of my own self. Most of the choices I make during the day, the little choices here and there, most of it's because I feel like that's the right way to go. Then I don't sit down and go, okay, what is the end of this particular thing I'm doing? Some things I do.
Yeah.
But for a lot of things I don't. Especially think of the things that are terribly important. Like which breakfast cereal am I going to eat this morning? What am I going to eat for breakfast? Am I going to put bacon on my sausage? Or I'm going to go a layer of bacon first, sausage built by Lincoln Logs, and another layer of bacon. It's like, how am I going to eat my breakfast? Those sort of things, just based on how I feel. So, what I think is you're probably correct. There are certain decisions about life that we make, certain decisions about what my worldview is going to look like, what I'm going to believe and not believe, that maybe do come from a deep sort of reflection. But as Brother Michael Paul pointed out, most people stay at the level of the sensible. That was Aristotle, right? St. Thomas. Aristotle said most people stay at the sensible level. Most people don't try to go further than that and punch through the sensible and say, what is the point? Why am I doing this? That's, as far as I can tell, that's close to what usually happens. People I talk to, It's not something that you're necessarily morally culpable for. It's just we don't really know any better. I was brought up the same way. I was kind of brought up to just kind of, you know, think about what I did, but there was no sort of like analysis, no sort of like rigorous sort of philosophical search. You could sit down and go, okay, what is the point of this? Does this correspond to reality or anything like that? I was never taught to think like that. Okay. Let's jump ahead here. Go ahead and bring out your little sheets here. We'll go ahead and we looked at this a little yesterday, but page 1, that was the second part we looked at here. So we're going to go a little further on that. So who could read the first, like this section here, the first second paragraph. Someone volunteer over here. Go ahead. The search
for wisdom has become particularly difficult in our times. The cultural milieu in which contemporary man lives does not favor it. The search for such wisdom is considered useless, senseless nostalgia, and completely outdated. Indeed, contemporary man's cultural milieu is fully oriented towards the development of science and technology. We consider efficiency above all else, and often risk forgetting man and his profound destiny. The development of science and technology affords man new, even surprising possibilities as regards his power to transform and use matter, his dominion over the physical and biological universe. Does not this prodigious and rapid development often become a sort of excretion that unbalances,
like overgrowth.
Yeah. That unbalances man in his human life and suppresses his deep harmony?
Okay, that's it. Good. Okay, so did you understand anything there? Is there something you understood? What is the main point of that little section? You want to take a stab at it? What's the main point he's trying to get at there? Yeah.
I think what he's trying to get at is no matter how far our science and technology goes, it's becoming unbalanced because we're not keeping up with the other aspects of the human condition.
Exactly. So the image is kind of a big old tree. There's a big tree there. Kind of growing too many branches on one side. Like if you go to San Antonio, we see those big old oak trees that grow out there around the Alamo. They got these branches that go up like 50 or 60 feet. And then there's like nothing on this side. Then there's all these branches on this side. The tree can't stay long unbalanced like that. So there's like an overgrowth on one side, and eventually the tree will fall over. So that's kind of the image he's getting at. Is that there's a part to our intelligence that we've kind of overworked. It's like if you just go to the gym, you just work out your right side. Like your right arm is super buff and your left arm. What? Yeah. It would be the same sort of weird sort of situation. But you can't develop just one side of your intelligence. That's what he's saying here. That's what he's saying here, that the development of science and technology affords man new, even surprising possibilities. For example, how surprising is it? Like if I remember how like, my cell phone looked when I first got my first cell phone, it was like 1997. That thing was this big clunky thing that had this antenna you pull out, and the only thing it did was fall. And if I could have jumped ahead to now, I would be very surprised at the things we were able to do. I remember the first time I saw that you could play a movie on the phone, and someone was like, "Hey, look!" I was like I almost couldn't handle that. So you can watch movies on your phone. I couldn't believe it. Because I've been in Africa for a long time, a couple of years. I came back, and it's crazy what's going on. So like it is surprising how science and technology has developed and how man has been able to dominate the physical universe. and even sometimes the biological part of us. Talk about, there's always some strange new thing you hear about in the news where they're trying to make a man-K hybrid and weird things like that. You know, like they're getting children, in vitro fertilization with children, and they're taking like DNA from like 3 different people. So you don't no longer have 2 parents, you have like 3 parents somehow. You know, so all those things lead to man's new, surprising possibilities as regards man's power to use matter, dominion over the physical biological universe. But as we were saying, does this not, to a certain extent, unbalance us like the tree that has too much growth on one side? We need to figure out how to prune the tree of our intelligence so that more growth starts growing on this side and that balances the tree out. So we get like a real nice tree. Okay. So there's the section under it there.
Got a question. Does it need to be pruned instead of focused more on the other side?
Yeah. I use prune in a loose sense.
Okay. It's like
taking
is it
care
more
of.
of a reducing
Taking care of,
it,
yeah.
or is it more?
In some cases it could be. In some cases it could be like another example. Those trees I was talking about that grow around the Alamo. Sometimes the branches grow out so far that they go into the ground, and they start kind of getting in the ground like that. I thought that was a good analogy for like. If you start growing out too far, eventually there's something that the tree can't handle anymore. So you could say that there's perhaps places we should not go. For example, we should perhaps not make a man-swine hybrid. For example, it's an analogy. So the analogy only goes so far. Obviously, it's more of a metaphor rather than an analogy. But yeah, there's some places we should not dive down into the ground if you're a tree. Trees are not meant to, branches of trees are not meant to dig into the earth like roots, I think that's kind of cool. Okay, so he says underneath, he says, towards the bottom of the page, by imposing itself as an essential thing in human life, does not it, so he means science and technology, does not it inevitably engender certain skepticism regarding philosophy? And especially regarding the first philosophy, which is the metaphysics of philosophy of being. So the only thing you think about is on this side of the tree is kind of a scientific and technological viewpoint. Makes me think of in Jurassic Park, which is kind of hits you over the head with that philosophical concept. At the same time, it's a good quote from what's his name, Jeff Goldblum in that movie. He said, "We spent so long trying to figure out if we could do it that we didn't think about if we should." And that's for me, I think that's the best line in the movie. I think it's in the book too. The idea that there are some things that we just should not do, whether on dinosaurs. It's too bad that the movie was focused more on the dinosaurs, and we do. It's kind of like a metaphor that we're doing to ourselves, really, in a certain way, what they were doing to dinosaurs. There's certain places we should not go. Okay, so it engenders a certain skepticism. It's like if all you saw were trees like this that grew on only one side. Like I've been up to the mountain passes, and I saw them the other day, but on windy Sugarloaf Mountain up there, where we were at Sugarloaf, right?
Not yours.
Oh, Mount Erie. Sugarloaf's the other. So at the top of the mountain, you saw there were certain trees because there's so much wind that blows from a certain direction. What happens? The trees all grow, all the branches on one side, like that. They call them flag trees. So if you lived up in the mountains where there was high winds like that, all you ever saw were those type of trees, you think, branches only grow on one side of the tree. And you would be hesitant to think that you were capable of having a tree with branches growing on both sides. So that's what I think Father Philippe is trying to say here, is that because we've only had branches, we've seen people with branches only on one side, we think that branches growing on the other side is impossible. that is impossible. It engenders certain skepticism that philosophical truth can even really be known. Because all we've ever seen are trees with branches growing on one side. And all we see are tree nurseries with branches growing on one side. We've never seen anything different. You can be skeptical about it. Okay, good. Okay, so jump ahead to page 74 here. Go to the top of page 74. Right before it says the life of the spirit, I thought this was interesting because it kind of gives a little overview of the living being. When we talk about philosophy of living being, what are we talking about? What makes a tree different from a rock, for example? Is there a difference? What makes a dog different from a man? Is there a difference? Or a chimpanzee different from a man? Is there a difference between a chimpanzee and a man?
I don't think so.
What?
2% of
2% difference, yeah. So chimpanzees, apparently, I don't know this myself, I'm not a scientist, but I've heard that chimpanzees have 98% of the DNA that humans have. So I don't know if that's a lot or if that's a little, really. But it sounds impressive. It sounds like a chimpanzee is only 2% away from being a man. Then you could also say, well, you know, a slice of watermelon. I'm trying to draw a watermelon here. There we go. There's a watermelon because it's got like little seeds, right? Something like that. Or rind. There you go. That's not very good. But. And a cloud. A cloud is 100% water. A slice of watermelon is 97% water. That means a watermelon is only 3% away from being a cloud. Very interesting. So obviously, percentages themselves don't tell us a whole lot. That's an interesting thing to think about. Are we that close to the animals? Are the animals? What distinguishes the human living being from the other animals? Is there something that distinguishes it? Or are we just like super animals? Is there something fundamentally different? Let's draw a little monkey here. There we go. That's kind of like a monkey. Monkeys look kind of like that, I think. It's kind of like a monkey. Thanks. Let's see, monkey. There you go. Kind of got legs that kind of go out like that. Got feet, he's got like thumbs. There we go. Thumbs for feet. There we go. Sometimes you have like
He
tails.
looks like a frog.
There you go.
That's a really good
That's kind of a monkey.
Monkey.
Yeah, there you go. So is there like a deep, uncrossable? We'll call this the uncrossable abyss. There you go. And over here is a man. I draw him a little more simply here. Is there like an uncrossable abyss between the human living being and the animal living being? Or is it just a case of quantity? How many times have you heard that human beings are the most intelligent simply because they have the bigger brains? Is that true? If you keep increasing the brain size of a monkey, will he eventually become human? It's an interesting thing to think about. So what makes us living? What distinguishes? Because we're interested in knowing who man is. We're not so interested in knowing who monkeys are. I mean, it's interesting. But we have no experience of being a monkey. We have experience of being a man, or a woman, so that's what interests us. So is there a sort of uncrossable abyss between us and the other animals? That's a big question, especially science doesn't really look at that question. They can't really tell us what makes a monkey specifically different from a man. They can just kind of describe things. Okay, so let's look at this little passage here, right before life of the Spirit. Who wants to read that? Who can read? Someone.
This is the last paragraph.
It's page 74, right before life of the Spirit. Yeah,
We can add that man, a living being endowed with sensitive life, is capable of moving himself. He's capable of locomotion. He has a vital power whereby he dominates the conditioning place in which he finds himself. If he moves about, it is above all to nourish himself, to find a vital milieu where he is best able to develop and avoid what can harm him. Most of the time, the passions of desire, flight, anger, and hate motivate and color his movement. And his different passions manifest themselves in how he moves. Obviously, someone who is moved by the desire to nourish himself does not move in the same way as somebody moved by fear or flight to avoid a dangerous animal. Someone moved by anger does not behave in the same way as someone possessed by hatred. The passions incarnate themselves in man's gait and behavior.
Yeah, man's gait, like his way of just kind of moving around. Okay, so what's the main point he's trying to make there? You want to take a stab at it? What did you understand there? I wrote up on the board as he was speaking, I wrote up a whole bunch of things that distinguish a living being. You notice. He has a sensitive life. Rocks don't have a sensitive life. Water doesn't have a sensitive life. The sun, for example, scientists were asking, I saw some scientists asking a strange question, is the sun alive? It's a question you could ask. A philosopher could ask any question. But you have to say, does the sun have a sensitive life? Does it move itself? You notice how moving itself and locomotion, that kind of confused me when I first started learning philosophy. Like moves itself and locomotion are not the same thing. So it means man has a sensitive life. It means he has a knowledge of reality through the senses. The senses produce a sort of knowledge for him. Like I was mentioning yesterday, when you open your eyes and you look around, you have a knowledge of reality, of the world around you. He moves himself, meaning that in your body, you're not just affected by, like a rock is just affected by the natural sort of environment, but you are also, you move yourself, you have your own digestion, for example. That's a good example of that. You're not just affected by the world around you, but you kind of, as a living being, you kind of move against the natural forces, you could say. So I grow in spite of the fact that everything says I should like not grow. Natural world, mountains kind of grow, but it's not like they're not alive. They get pushed around by all the different forces. So a living being doesn't just let itself be pushed around by the forces, it also kind of pushes. It grows. That's a good thing to say. It grows and moves itself. You have like a metabolism, you burn food and stuff like that. You ingest the food, you assimilate food, the food becomes part of you. That's how you move yourself. That's really strange when you eat a cookie or some bacon, for example. When you eat bacon, it becomes part of you. How does that happen? Like it used to be a pig, it used to be part of a pig, and now it's suddenly you. It's really weird. You ever stop and think about that? A pig became part of you. In a few hours. Really kind of an astonishing thing. It's like cool. You know? And locomotion was in there too. The living being will act like he just went somewhere. See how he's moving? Locomotion. Motion in his locale. Locomotion. Or crazy motion if you're from Laredo. Oh, yeah. No, just kidding. So he moves himself. He is able to move around in his environment. You say, well, a plant doesn't move around. You say, well, they can grow and they can. Oh, wait a minute. I believe there's a distinction between plants that have living beings that have locomotion and some that don't. For example, trees don't really move. They kind of stay in the same place. They grow, but they don't really move. Whereas other animals specifically have locomotion. So man has a sensitive life. He moves himself, he grows, he digests and sort of assimilates food and all those sort of things. He can move around in his environment, and he conditions his environment. Man is probably the living being that conditions his environment the most. Wherever man goes, he makes the place cozier. I mean, just look at us here. We built this whole place just to kind of like be in a little mini environment around us. We build a fire to bring the temperature, make it more comfortable for us, so that we can use our intelligence. He nourishes himself. These are all things that the living being, especially man as a living being does. Okay, so he's talking about the passions briefly, so he says, it's a good little introduction to what the passions are. So next time we'll talk more specifically about the passions. So he says, most of the time, the passions of desire, flight, anger, and hate motivate and color our movements. So the passions, you could say in a certain way, is what Michael Paul was talking about. Some of the passions seem kind of more active than others. Like when you're really, really angry at someone, it almost seems like an active sort of thing. I feel less like I'm being affected, and more like there's some sort of fire in me burning to like destroy the thing that I'm angry at. So what are these sort of things that go on in us? The passions of flight, the passions of anger and hatred and all these things, they motivate us. Most of the time, the actions that we do come from those sort of motivations, the passions. Why do I pick this particular, clothing over this other clothing? Well, this one makes me feel better. This one I go, oh, that's pretty. That's passion. That you're motivated by the passion of love to pick a certain type of clothing. Or especially obvious with food. Why did I pick that food instead of that food? I love this food. I hate that food. So that's why I was mentioning at the beginning that many of our choices are motivated by our passions. So next time we're going to kind of talk about what are the passions exactly, and how can we use our intelligence to guide our passions and not let our passions guide our intelligence. So I think that's where we're going to stop there, and we're going to take it to the next time. Okay, if there's any questions, how much time do you have?
Like 5-10 minutes.
Okay, so any questions? Any questions on anything we said? Sensitive life. Animals are different from humans. Yeah.
I don't know if this is too big of a question, but I've always had this problem with different people that I've talked to and trying to explain why, God is totally, makes sense that God is real. And they're coming from the standpoint of evolution, saying, well, evolution, that happens. And they're just like, well, can there be a world where God and evolution can coexist?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So what's the question?
So can evolution be a part of God's plan, and can He be the instigator of making things?
Yes, that's a very, very good question. I think that to get down the foundation of that question, first of all, in philosophy, you would have to presuppose that you've discovered the existence of God, whom we have no experience of. So it's possible to eventually discover the existence of God. But asking about creation and things like that in a philosophical context is kind of jumping the gun. You would, so I think perhaps where I would immediately see that there's a problem with saying that creation or that God and what you say evolution can't exist together, I would say, well, there's a little problem there because you're like evolution is a question of how things change. It's not a question of where things came from. It's not about, it's not a question of being. I think that's the good way of saying it. Evolution is not about being. So, on a philosophical level, you would say, like, to take the monkey as an example, you'd say, well, the monkey came from, you'd say, well, the monkey came from other monkeys, who came from, like, these sort of shrew-looking mammals, who came from mammal-like reptiles, who came, and it just never ends.
Right.
You're like, yes, but what is holding that monkey in existence right now? How come the monkey exists? What is the cause of his existence? That's where God really comes into play in that sort of discussion. It's not like a long time ago, God created the world. It's like, no, God is creating the world right now, if he truly is God. So I think where there's a confusion is on the level of being, perhaps. Is that evolution is about change, what we would call becoming in evolution. Is about change or becoming, to use a philosophical word. One thing changes into another, into another, into another. There's no end, there's no finality, as we would say. There's no purpose, there's no point. It's not even a question of why, it's just a question of how. How did that thing become that? How did that thing become that? There's really no point to it until you look at the level of being and say, what is the cause of that monkey right now? Or more importantly, what is the cause of me as a human being right now? Or you? You kind of see the point there?
Yeah, that's really.
So I think that's where a lot of those type of people, those type of ideas go astray, is that they haven't even considered it from a philosophical perspective. They think that somehow God, which is a philosophical concept, can be disproved by a scientific concept, which is not really even in the same domain. Okay, that's good? Okay. All right, so we'll take up next time more of a little more in-depth study of what the passions are, what they mean to me. Why are my passions sometimes kind of crazy and other times I'm more in control of them? Like, what are my passions for? What do they mean to me as a human being? Okay. There we go.
I have another question if you're outside, if not, we can pick it up.
Is we'll stop now, we'll have a break. The next class will start in a little less than 10 minutes. But for those of you who'd like to continue discussing this kind of just outside of the context
Or you
of
can
the classroom.
or you can write it down and we'll take it up next time. Okay. Let us pray. Let us stand. Glory be to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Brother Michael Paul, you want me to leave the monkey on the board?
We'll start at 9:30, so you have about 8 minutes. And mass will be at 11, so if you think you need a snack or something, now's the time to do that.
It's okay.
Yes, for the Eucharistic fast, you cannot have tea.
Okay.
But for the fast on Good Friday, Husband's Day, you can.
Okay, yeah.
More wood.
Yeah, the Father's here.
This used to be a living being. Now it's inert matter.
So why?
That's kind of a.
So what?
Why is
So
he
Father
okay
needs- Father needs-
for the Friday fast, but not the
You can read
Father Z's blog.
Fast for Good Friday is like discipline, whereas the fast for the Eucharist is like not having anything in your body, in your digestive tract. That would be
Interesting way
good.
of looking at it.
That would be nice.
Yes.
Stop bringing wood.
Oh, you
So
want more?
actually, speaking of those, the different the senses, so you have the sensitive life, the motion,
Right, yeah.
emotion, stuff like that. Plants have all that, right? So,
Well, they don't have all of it.
okay, I'll have one.
Like certain living beings have other powers that but there's a few powers that living beings have.
11.
For example, the ability to move themselves against the forces of nature.
Oh.
That presupposes the philosophy of nature, which I but you know how, like, imagine a rock. The rock cannot, like, do anything else than be happy with the rock. It's like pure potency. The rock is pure matter, meaning